The winter of 1863 descended upon Hollow Creek like a biblical plague, wrapping the isolated Utah Valley in snow and silence. But beneath the stillness, behind frost-covered windows and the shuttered chapel, the Lafferty household pulsed with something far darker than winter's chill. You wouldn't know by looking. The Lafferty family, with their neatly parted hair and Sunday smiles, seemed like just another Mormon pioneer clan pushing through hardship. But neighbors whispered, always whispered. Why did no one ever see the daughters past sundown? Why were visitors never allowed beyond the parlor? And why did the local midwife who once tended to the family vanish without a trace? It wasn't until Sheriff Alton Harker stepped foot inside the Lafferty homestead one bitter February morning that the whispers became screams. He would later testify, his voice cracked from trauma, that he found things in that cellar not meant for any living man to see. But to understand what really happened, why that cellar was so infamous, you have to go back. Not just to 1863. Not even to the founding of Hollow Creek. You have to go to a spring night in 1851, when the patriarch Abraham Lafferty claimed to have seen an angel made of fire. That night changed everything. He burned all the family's books, declared the Bible corrupted, and took his wife into the barn for 3 days straight. When they returned, she was never the same. Her hair white, her eyes vacant, and she never spoke again. Not even once. Abraham said God had spoken to him, that he demanded purity of blood, body, and spirit, that only his seed was chosen, and that the family would now live by the doctrine of holy flesh. But no one knew what that meant. Not until the ritual nights began. It said the youngest Lafferty son, Thomas, tried to run in 1857. Just 12 years old, frostbitten and barefoot, he made it as far as the Bitterwood Ridge before a group of followers caught him. What they did to him remains sealed in the county records. But a local hunter found a piece of Thomas's coat nailed to a tree, with a single word carved beneath, traitor. When missionaries from Salt Lake visited in 1859, they noted strange behaviors. Women who would not make eye contact. Children who recited verses that weren't in any scripture. A cellar that always remained locked. One elder wrote in his diary that he felt a presence in that house, ancient and wet, like a drowned thing pulled from the earth. Still, no action was taken. No investigation. Hollow Creek was remote, hard to reach, and the Laffertys had powerful allies. Abraham's brother, Gideon, was a church elder. And people in those days? They didn't question blood ties. They feared them. But some did speak out. Eleanora Pike, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, claimed she saw girls being led into the Lafferty barn, bound at the wrists with red silk cords. She tried to report it. But within a week, her cabin caught fire in the night. She survived, but her tongue had been cut out. Still, she scratched a single message into her cabin wall with a burnt nail. They feed it flesh. What did she mean? Some believed the Laffertys were simply mad. Others said they were touched by something older than madness. Something ancient. Even the native tribes avoided Hollow Creek, calling the valley the land where the snow weeps. But it wasn't snow that ran red that winter. It was blood. By 1863, 4 daughters had died under what the Laffertys called God's will. All were buried without coffins, wrapped in cloth soaked in wine. Abraham claimed their deaths were sacrifices of purity to cleanse the sin of the mother. But no one dared ask what the sin was. Until Ruth. She was 17. Eyes like storm clouds. And unlike the others, she remembered. She remembered the chants, the basement ceremonies, the bridal cleansing that took place every solstice. And she remembered her mother's screams, muffled, rhythmic, like some perverse hymn. Ruth ran. She didn't get far. But she left behind a journal, hidden in a hollow beam above the hearth. Sheriff Harker would find it years later, trembling as he read the lines written in smeared ink and dried tears. They say the body is not ours, that it must be offered. That father is both prophet and groom. But I feel something watching us from beneath the floor. It speaks in dreams. And it's always hungry. That journal is now locked in the Salt Lake archives. Pages too fragile to turn. Words too dangerous to share. But even that wasn't the darkest thing found in the house. No, that would be the mirror. An old mirror, black-framed and cracked. In the cellar. Sheriff Harker swore he saw a girl in it, alive, moving, mouthing words he couldn't hear. But when he turned around, the room was empty. Except for the table. And the chains. After that, Harker left the force. Moved to Nevada. Drank himself to death within the year. And yet, there are those who say the mirror still exists. That it passes through hands in secret circles. That if you look into it long enough, you'll hear the same chant Ruth described. purity, obedience, offering, rebirth. We want to believe that such darkness can't come from family, that parents don't hurt their own, that faith can't become a weapon. But Hollow Creek reminds us, not all monsters hide in shadows. Some kneel in prayer, some wear wedding rings, some call you daughter. And the Laffertys? They called it love. If you're still here, thank you. Because stories like this aren't easy, but they matter. Because the past has teeth and it still bites the present. So don't look away. Don't forget what happened in that cellar. And for the sake of those who never escaped, stay with us. Because you haven't heard the worst of it yet. The first thing they did was cover the windows. Every single one. Thick burlap, nailed from inside. Not just for privacy. Not just to hide the screaming. But because, according to Abraham, the light makes the spirits restless. And what he meant by spirits, no one ever fully understood. Some believed it was metaphor. Others swore they saw something through those cracks. Eyes that glinted red, shapes that moved against the grain of time, shadows that didn't belong to anything alive. But the truth, like everything in the Lafferty house, was tangled in obedience, fear, and silence. There were 12 girls in total. Nieces, cousins, daughters, even orphans brought in from settlements to be purified. They were told they were chosen, special, that the seed of God had been placed in Abraham and only he could awaken their wombs of light. They were told the pain was holy. When the townspeople asked why the Lafferty girls were always pale, limping, or missing for days, they were told it was illness. Some pioneer sickness. Something in the water. No one asked again. Because no one wanted to be marked for the red vigil. That's what they called it when the family came for you. You didn't see them approach. You just woke up to red marks smeared on your door. Sometimes paint. Sometimes not. It meant you'd seen too much. Or asked too much. Or, God forbid, touched one of the girls. One young man tried. Jonathan Ridge. He was sweet on Ruth. Slipped her a ribbon when they crossed paths near the well. She smiled. For the first time in weeks. 3 nights later, he was found near the edge of the creek, naked and skinned from the chest down. His lips were sewn shut with horsehair. No animal could have done that. And no human should have. The town buried him quietly. His father moved away by spring. The church said nothing. No one did. Because even the ones who didn't believe in curses feared the Laffertys. But not everyone was silent. One man, Josiah Hensley, a blacksmith with no love for God or family politics, began collecting testimonies. He scribbled every rumor, every tale, every terrified whisper he could find. He kept them locked in a chest beneath his floorboards. The notes tell of underground rooms lined with scripture written in menstrual blood, of birthing rituals involving animals, of husbandry trials, where the girls were forced to marry their own brothers in mock ceremonies. Not for love, not for tradition, but for control. And there were rules, so many rules. No looking men in the eye, no bathing without supervision, no speaking after dusk, and above all, no resisting this sanctified touch. If a girl disobeyed, she was put in the milk room, a stone chamber beneath the goat shed, named not for anything dairy, but for what came out of the girls when they screamed long enough, white froth, bloodless and trembling. Ruth had spent 6 days in there once. Her offense? Writing her mother's name in the dirt outside the barn. By the time she emerged, her fingernails were gone. Her voice was gone. But something in her had turned to steel. She never cried again. She never looked down again. And she started watching, listening, waiting. It was Ruth who saw what they did to Esther. Esther was the cousin. 14. The moon child, they called her because she was born during a lunar eclipse and had mismatched eyes, one green, one blue. Abraham took this as a sign she was ripe for the union. They held the ceremony in the field behind the house. Esther in white. Abraham in nothing but ash. The rest of the family formed a circle, chanting in tongues even Ruth didn't recognize. Some language scraped from the bottom of creation. Ruth tried to look away, but Esther saw her, met her eyes, and mouthed the words, "Help me." But Ruth couldn't move. Afterward, Esther was never the same. She plucked out her green eye with a fork 2 days later. Said it had been watching her from inside. That she could feel it blink when she tried to sleep. They locked her in the attic after that. When the snow began to melt in April, the smell became unbearable. They buried what was left of her beneath the hearth. And then they prayed. Every time someone died, the family held a cleansing, which was a polite word for what really happened. Every male member stripped bare, anointed their bodies in animal fat, and spent the night in the cellar with the surviving girls. No lights. No food. Just touch. Just breath. Just doctrine. Josiah wrote that during one of these rituals, he heard what sounded like multiple voices chanting in unison, except there were only 2 people in the room at the time. He left that note half-finished, the ink smeared as though written during a tremor. It ended with, "There's something else down there." Ruth once asked her older brother Elijah what happened in the cellar. He told her a story. About a book. A thick, leather-bound thing that didn't burn when thrown in the fire. That hummed when touched. Abraham found it in a cave north of Hollow Creek. Said it was older than the world. Said it told him what to do. The book, according to Elijah, whispered instructions. And the worst part? The instructions worked. Because when Ruth was 12, she got sick. Dying sick. Veins black, eyes swollen. The local healer gave her 3 days. But Abraham held a ceremony. Read from the book. Fed her something made from blood and honey. She lived. That's when Ruth began to believe. Not in God. Not in her father. But in the evil that wrapped itself around that family like a second skin. There was a power in Hollow Creek. And it fed on obedience. One night, Ruth dug a hole beneath her bed and hid a knife in it. She waited weeks, months, for the right moment. And then, Lydia. Lydia was just 9. Quiet. Always holding a doll made of straw and bone. She was Ruth's half-sister, though neither of them truly understood what half meant in a house where mothers and daughters shared husbands. When Ruth saw Abraham mark Lydia's door with the white ash, she knew. She waited until the house was asleep, crept into the cellar, knife shaking in her hand. She wasn't planning to kill him. Not really, just hurt him. Stop him. But what she found wasn't Abraham. It was the book. Open on the stone table, pages turning on their own. And beside it, Lydia. Standing. Eyes vacant. Mouth whispering words that weren't hers. That weren't anyone's. Then Abraham stepped from the shadows. He didn't yell. Didn't strike her. He only smiled. "Do you feel it now?" he whispered. "The heat of the divine?" Ruth screamed. The knife didn't stop him. The screams didn't stop him. Only when she shouted her mother's name, Hannah, did something shift. The wall seemed to tremble. The fire went out. And Abraham collapsed. Seizing. Foaming. Gone. But the others came running. And Ruth? She ran. Into the snow. Into the woods. Knife still in her hand. Lydia trailing behind her barefoot, crying. They made it as far as the old copper mine. Hid there for 2 nights. Survived on melted snow and roots. But on the 3rd night, Ruth woke to find Lydia gone. She searched. Screamed. Cried herself dry. When she returned to the entrance, Lydia was there. Smiling. Clean. And behind her, Elijah. He didn't say anything. Just reached out his hand. And Ruth, knowing what would happen, took it. She went back. But not to surrender. She played along. Smiled. Prayed. Waited. And when spring arrived, she opened the cellar door herself. Let something out. They called it a sickness. Said the whole Lafferty clan was struck down by some fever that started with bleeding eyes and ended in madness. By May, 10 were dead. 2 missing. Only Ruth survived. She was found wandering the woods, naked, repeating a single phrase. The mouth is closed. The mouth is closed. No one ever found the book. And the cellar? Collapsed in a storm the week after. Some say Ruth died in an asylum. Others say she joined a convent and never spoke again. But the most persistent rumor, the one whispered by gravekeepers and archivists, is that she became a midwife. Quiet. Kind. And when she held a newborn, she would sometimes whisper into its ear, "Run from the blood. If you're still here, thank you." Not many people can face a story like this to the end. But we have to, because silence is how monsters survive. And remembering is the only way we keep them buried. What happened in Hollow Creek wasn't just abuse. It wasn't just religion gone wrong. It was belief weaponized, family corrupted. And somewhere deep beneath our own feet, that book may still whisper. Watch closely. Listen carefully. Because stories like this don't end. They echo. They told the townspeople it was a fire. A chimney spark, they said. A tragic accident that turned the Lafferty house into ash and smoke. No one questioned it. By then, most folks wanted Hollow Creek scrubbed from memory. But the truth was far stranger. Far colder. Because there was no fire. Only the silence that followed Ruth's return. The house still stood for weeks after. But no one entered it. Not even animals. Hunters reported deer circling wide around the Lafferty property. The birds went quiet. One trapper claimed he saw a young girl in the attic window waving, but when he approached, there was no girl. Only dozens of dead flies pressed against the glass from the inside. And that mirror? The one Sheriff Harker spoke of? It was gone. The cellar collapsed, yes, but the mirror was never found among the rubble. The townspeople chalked it up to delusion, hysteria, the unraveling mind of a traumatized man. But Ruth knew the truth, and so did the woman who came for her. Her name was Sister Abigail. A nun technically, but not the kind you'd find in a church pew. She was sent from Salt Lake, a fixer of sorts. The church needed the scandal buried. Quickly. Quietly. But Abigail was different. She had seen things. Heard of other families. Other places. Other books. When she sat with Ruth, she didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Instead, she asked one question: did it speak to you too? Ruth didn't answer. But her hand trembled. There was an unspoken understanding between them. A horror that didn't need to be named. Abigail took Ruth with her, not to a convent, not to a doctor, but to a house near the desert. A safe house. Hidden from maps. Guarded by silence and prayer. Ruth stayed there 3 years. During that time she wrote hundreds of pages. Testimony, drawings, maps of the Lafferty home, transcriptions of the chants. Most were burned later by the church. But a few survived. Enough to know the evil wasn't buried with Abraham. Because evil like that doesn't die. It waits. And in 1868 it called again. This time in Nevada. A small settlement called Chapel Ridge. It started with a preacher, young, clean-shaven, well-spoken. Claimed he had visions. That a voice in the desert led him to an ancient text, buried in sand, wrapped in deer hide. He called it the Covenant of Flesh. Sound familiar? Ruth thought so too. She begged Abigail to let her go. Said she needed to see for herself. But Abigail refused. Said Ruth's soul was too thin, too fragile to stand against the book again. But Ruth didn't listen. She left in the night. No horse. Just her journal and a blade carved from bone. No one knows how she got there, but a traveler claimed to see a pale girl walking barefoot across the salt flats, speaking to herself in a tongue that made his ears ring. By the time she arrived in Chapel Ridge, 5 girls had vanished. The preacher said they were blessed, that they'd been taken to a higher pasture. Ruth knew what that meant. She posed as a midwife again, offered to tend the sick, deliver babies. It wasn't long before she saw the signs. The way the women flinched when men walked past. The bruises. The empty eyes. And beneath the preacher's home, another cellar. Stone walls. A black table. And on it, the mirror. But not cracked. Oh, shining. The moment Ruth looked into it, she felt it again. That tug. That hunger. Not from the glass, but from behind it. Like something leaning forward, waiting to be remembered. She ran. Not away, but deeper. She snuck into the preacher's house during a sermon, tore through drawers, smashed cabinets, and finally, beneath the floorboards, she found it. The book. Same cover. Same scent. A mix of mold and meat. It pulsed when touched. She didn't read it. She burned it, poured lamp oil on its spine and lit a match. But it didn't scream. It didn't cry. It laughed. The flames roared blue, and in that flicker, Ruth saw faces. Abraham. Sir. Even Lydia. All mouthing the same word. Return. She barely escaped. The house went up like tinder. Some say it burned for 3 days. Others say no fire ever touched it. That it still stands. That if you enter it, time unravels. But Ruth didn't stop. She knew now, it wasn't just about the Laffertys. It was bigger. Older. A thread running through families, through faith, through flesh. The doctrine of holy flesh had traveled. Through whispers. Through bloodlines. And the mirror? It wasn't destroyed, just lost. It reappeared in photographs over the years. 1891, St. Louis Asylum. A girl sits in the corner, hands chewed to the bone. Behind her, a mirror. 1923, Arkansas farmhouse. A family of 12, all found dead. Mirror in the attic. 1967, Utah again. A commune burns. No survivors. But one photo remains. A mirror untouched by flame. Some say it travels on its own. Others say it calls to those who carry the mark. And Ruth? She carried it always. They found her body in 1872, just outside of Silver Creek. Face serene. Heart missing. But no blood. No wound. Just gone. As if something took it, clean, silent, surgical. Buried without ceremony. Grave marked only by a straw doll. The same kind Lydia used to carry. The journal she kept? Vanished. Except one page, mailed anonymously to Sister Abigail months later. Read. It lives in us. In touch. In control. in the quiet submission of skin to hand. The mirror is not a window. It is a door. And I hear it knocking. You want to believe this is fiction. You want to believe that families don't become cults. That children aren't married in basements. That books can't whisper. That blood doesn't remember. But Hollow Creek existed. So did Ruth. And so did the screams. If you made it this far, I need you to do one thing. Not for me. For the girls. For the ones who never escaped. Don't let this vanish. Share it. Speak it. Let others know what was done in the name of God. Because what hides behind doctrine can wear any face, even yours. And if tonight you hear a knock that doesn't come from the door, don't answer. Don't look in the mirror. Just run. It wasn't until 1901 that anyone dared excavate Hollow Creek. A team of amateur historians, 3 men, 1 woman, traveled from New York, drawn by the rumors. They called themselves truth diggers, obsessed with lost cults and forbidden texts. They came with maps, tools, and journals filled with forgotten names. But they had no idea what they were walking into. The Lafferty house was gone. Burned, collapsed, erased. But the land remembered. They pitched their tents where the chapel once stood. On the first night, one of the men, Henry, heard voices. He wrote in his journal, "I dreamed of a wedding. But the bride had no eyes, and the groom kept whispering a word I couldn't understand, bloodlight." The next morning, Henry was gone. They found his boots at the edge of the woods. And a note nailed to a tree with a bone. He went beneath. There was no cave nearby. No tunnel. But the others, drunk on curiosity, kept digging. On the 3rd day, they found something beneath a collapsed wall. A mirror. Not broken. Still warm to the touch. None of them spoke for the rest of the trip. The woman, Claire, returned to New York alone. Months later, she was committed after trying to remove her own skin with a mirror shard. When the doctors asked why, she simply whispered, "Too many hands. Too many hands." The mirror was never recovered. But its legend grew. By 1920, the story of the Lafferty family had become little more than a local ghost tale. The kind kids whispered at campfires. A haunted valley. A family that married their daughters. A book that bled when you touched it. But the truth doesn't die in stories. It hides in them. There are reports. Quiet ones. Spread across time like breadcrumbs. Women disappearing during religious fast. Men claiming to be prophets after digging in the desert. Children speaking languages no one taught them. And always, the same ritual phrase. Purity. Obedience. Offering. Rebirth. Even now, some old families in Utah don't say the Lafferty name. Not because they've forgotten, but because they haven't. Ruth's descendants are harder to trace. Most believe she died childless. But one theory says she gave birth in secret, twin girls. Taken in by a family in Kansas. Raised with new names. New rules. One of them, Mary Ellen, wrote in her diary at age 11. "Sometimes I feel the dark crawl into my bones. I think it's something passed down. Something my mother left behind." The diary was found in 1954, after Mary Ellen disappeared. All that remained was a small doll. Straw and bone. The same design as Lydia's. Patterns. Always patterns. The abuse passed as tradition. The rituals disguised as religion. The ceremonies clothed in holiness. The bloodline never broke. And in the end, that's what the story has always been about. Control. Not just the kind that holds you down, but the kind that grows in you. The kind you call faith when really, it's infection. One man decades later tried to publish the full account of the Lafferty legacy. A professor named Dr. Elliot Graves. He gathered over 700 pages of evidence. Testimonies, photos, journal entries, town records. He titled it The House Without Windows. The manuscript was seized before publication. The publisher went bankrupt within a year. Dr. Graves was found hanging from a tree near Hollow Creek. No shoes. No eyes. Just a mirror shard buried in his chest. Even today, if you walk the grounds where the house once stood, your compass will spin. The birds will not sing. And at exactly 3:03 a.m., if you're standing over the old root cellar, some say you'll hear her. Not screaming. Not crying. But whispering. Calling names no one alive remembers. And some people answer. Not because they want to, but because something inside them already knows the words. The rituals may have changed shape. They may no longer take place in barns or under oil lamps. But they continue. Behind closed doors. In families that demand silence. In communities where obedience is salvation. In bedrooms where children are told, this is what love looks like. Because that's what Abraham Lafferty taught. Control masked as devotion. Obedience as a virtue. Flesh as currency. And it worked. Not because he was powerful, but because others allowed it. And even now, echoes remain. There are girls who wake screaming from dreams they can't explain. Boys who see shadows in mirrors that don't match their movements. Families who pass down rules without ever explaining why. But we know why. Because monsters like the Laffertys aren't buried. They're inherited. The book, the mirror, the doctrine, it's not about a place. It's not about Hollow Creek. It's about the willingness to believe that hurting someone is righteous as long as you call it holy. And that, more than anything, is the horror. If you're still watching, you've carried this weight with me. And I want you to feel something most people avoid after stories like this. Anger. Because we cannot undo what happened. But we can name it. We can scream it into the walls that once held silence like a sacrament. So that if even one person sees the same signs in their own home, they'll know it's not God. It's not love. It's not fate. It's abuse wearing a mask. Please don't let this end here. Not with this video. Not with my voice. Tell the story. Share it. Let the shame burn away so only truth remains. Because somewhere, someone is still in the cellar. Still waiting for the knock to stop. Still hoping anyone will listen. And if one night you find yourself walking past a mirror, and something inside you stops, do not look in. Because some reflections don't show your face. They show what's behind you. And what's always been.